Hello everybody, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today it's that time of year again. It is the end of 2024, and so I'm going to be doing a couple of wrap-up videos to talk about the top 5 strategy and top 5 war games as I saw it of the year 2024. Now, obviously this list can only include games I played. I'm not going to include anything that I didn't play, so it won't necessarily be a perfect list, and it's not going to be a perfect list anyway because no list like this is truly objective. It is very subjective to my own personal tastes and preferences. I will also add that these are the games that were released in the calendar year 2024. I'm a little bit flexible whether it's a 1.0 or a early access. If there was a release, either into full release or to early access, I would include it in the list. Some stuff that might have come out in December of the previous year, I might consider including, just because if it was a great game and it was basically at the end of the year, that kind of blends over, right? Like award ceremonies usually have some sort of cutoff period where they say anything released after this date gets considered the following year, although usually there's a recency bias, so that kind of hurts them in the grand scheme of things, but that's enough of that. Yeah, and so it's not just what did I play the most of, because frankly, this year I played a lot of games that did not come out this year. And if I had done a top 5 most played games list, that would look very different and probably would skew heavily into games from previous years. So I did limit myself to just games that came out in the year 2024. Today's list, the top 5 war games of 2024. We will also do a top 5 strategy game list shortly, but for today's video, it is the top 5 war games of 2024. And without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in to number 5. At number 5 is Classified France 44, a game developed by Absolutely Games and published by Team 17. This is a turn-based tactics game that takes place in World War II in the run-up to D-Day. So the premise of this game is that you are leading a team of Allied special operators, I said that weird, wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable, but we're leading a team of Allied special forces in northern France, trying to basically gain enough control or disruption over different regions in France to support the eventual Allied landings. I'm not usually a big turn-based tactics player. I've done a little bit of tactics games. I remember Partisan 1941, which came out a couple of years ago, which I really enjoyed. I think that was kind of based off like the Commando games, although that one was real-time. Classified 44 is turn-based. Again, not usually a big part of the types of games I play, but I was actually paid to play it, and so that's kind of what got me to look at it. We did a series of sponsored videos for it, and obviously, we play a lot of war games and whatnot on this channel, and so I figured why not take a look at it. And in playing it, I actually quite enjoyed it. So generally, we kind of already talked about the premise. You're trying to gain influence over provinces in the lead up to D-Day. You have a certain number of days that counts down. You can do operations every single day. You have to manage your squad of operators. Your squad can grow as you come upon resistance fighters or other folks like that. Initially, your force is sort of pair-dropped into France to lead an uprising, if you will, against the Germans there. And there's different types of missions. There's stealth missions. There's assault missions that have sort of different flavors for those types of outcomes. You can do things like disrupt a Tiger repair facility or other things like that. The kind of things you'd think of when you think of resistance fighters. Frankly, it's been a little while since we played this on the channel. This game came all the way back in March of 44, and I generally really enjoyed it. Again, not usually the kind of game that I'm into. I wonder how it would have played differently if it was real-time. I didn't feel like there was as much interplay between the characters as I would have liked, and I also felt that it would have been nice if there was more, if your soldiers could die each mission, I guess is what I mean. So, like, soldiers can get injured in missions and die on the tactical map, but when you get back to the operations map, like, the characters don't die if they die in the game, right? So I would have liked to see my soldiers be able to die. Like, my recollection of Partisan 41 was that your characters could die at any time, and if they died, they died, and that was it. As opposed to, hey, this character still has a little bit of narrative, a little bit of story that has to go along with it, so they're not going to die. They get injured, they'll be removed from future battles, but they won't actually die. And that, I guess, is one of the gripes I would have liked to have seen, was to see, permadeath, if you will. You had this campfire mechanic, which a lot of these tactics kind of games have, where different folks sort of bond around the campfire. Enemy levels can go up or down based on your success or whatnot. When enemy levels are higher, you might face stronger enemies. You might kind of have anti-partisan forces, which are brought in to kind of deal with your operations. Overall, and obviously you get loadout customization and things like that. There's different factions that you try to win support of within France. So it's not just your group of commandos, but there's actually like communist factions or different resistance groups within France that you're trying to appeal to. Depending on your relationships with them, you may get better or worse access to gear that they may have. So there's a lot of really interesting components to the game. And I enjoyed myself playing this. Like I said, I was paid for the videos we saw on the channel. Those were sponsored. Not in any way. I haven't talked to anybody there since I created those videos. So this video, including this on the list, is purely based off my own perspective. I don't benefit in any way by saying this game is on my list for top 5 games, but I thought you should know that when we did play this on the channel, it was sponsored at that time. But yeah, I enjoyed my time with it more than I thought I would. And, I think that is definitely one of the standout tactics games of the year, and the standout of the tactics games I played for the year. So that is Classified France 44 by Absolutely Games and Team 17. At number 4 on my list is Headquarters World War II, developed by Starny Games and published by Slytherin. Guys, I think I'm a mark. Like, I think if we were to say what are you a mark for, I think it is for Panzer General style games, right? Like, we played a bunch of Panzer Corps 2. Headquarters World War II is similar to it. It has a little bit more of a tactics element to it, I think, especially with the way that the artillery moves and your units move across the map. Starny Games' previous games, the strategic mind games, those are very much, hey, we're going to do Panzer General, the old classic by SSI, the turn-based, hex-based games, kind of at an operational level, and, with units with like hit points, no real idea of how many people are there, unit size is a little bit squishy, but you build up your force over multiple battles and gain experience and things like that. That was their previous game, the Strategic Mind games, which are very much like Panzer General clones. Headquarters World War II is a little bit less that. It's a little bit tactics-like, while still retaining a lot of those same elements. And yet, for whatever reason, and no matter how many of these I play, for one that's done well, I usually enjoy it quite a bit and will play it a lot. I liked the more tactical nature of this. I wouldn't call this a turn-based tactics game in the same way that like Classified 44 is, but it is. There's no doubt there's elements of that here. It's classified as a turn-based tactics game, so maybe I'm just letting their previous games shadow my perception a little bit too much. But it does feel like kind of a level up a little bit in terms of fidelity from a tactical representation away from Classified 44, and a little bit sharing a lot of sort of the Panzer General style mechanics. There's no like storytelling of your soldiers between missions or anything like that most tactics games that I experience have. Although your units do carry over from battle to battle, they do gain experience, you do unlock upgrades and things like that. One of the things I didn't love about the game was the unit cap made battles feel too small, but overall, I still really enjoyed it. I haven't played the DLC yet for the, I think it was a Market Garden DLC, but overall, I enjoyed it. My main, I guess, complaint or desire was, outside the units being a little bit, the battles being a little bit smaller, was I would have liked to have seen bigger campaigns. It felt like, and this was a problem with Total Tank Generals from a couple of years ago too, it just felt like the scenario count on each individual campaign was too small. And I would have sacrificed a campaign to give more missions to each side. Like, it felt a little bit light there, but overall I enjoyed it. I thought the map look and feel was dramatically improved from their strategic mind games, where there was a lot of difficulty telling what was going on. I missed the really super corny 3D cutscenes that they had in the strategic mind games that are not here. It doesn't shock me that their publisher Slytherin wouldn't be like, hey, let's make a meme-worthy 3D cutscene that, like, it's meme-worthy because it's so bad. But I enjoyed those. But overall, Headquarters World War II, it's a game I enjoyed. Not sure I have a ton else to say about it. And this particular, the base game focuses on the Normandy campaign. So you don't really see a lot, you don't have Soviet units, for example. It's mostly about the landings, the attempt to break through. You can play as the Germans, you can play as the Americans, or as the British. I would love a Soviet campaign. Again, the DLC is for Market Garden. But yeah. Anyway, guys, that is my number 4 on the list. Headquarters World War II by Starny Games and Slytherin. At number 3 on my list is WARNO by Eugen Systems, made and published by Eugen Systems. This is it's a real-time tactical war game that takes place in the Cold War, well, I guess World War III, Cold War gone hot, in Central Europe, primarily in Germany. I think they've added some DLC for North Tog, so like the Northern Plains. I have not played that. I've basically just played the base game. This is sort of in the vein of the original Eugen games that were very popular. Eugen's War Game Air Land Battle, War Game European Escalation, those series of games. It's a very fast play, very big decks. You have sort of units that take casualties, and as they take casualties, those units, those items that are destroyed are, they're lost. So if you have 4 Abrams in a division and you lose 2 of them, you've only got 2 left. You can't call in more of those reinforcements, but you could call in maybe some M60s or some other units. It is a game where when you fight on tactical battles, you have different sections of the map you try to take. Based on the sections you hold, that influences your points. You can use points to call in more troops. And so, you try to slowly take over the map while attriting the enemy of forces so they can't keep throwing reinforcements at you, while also, again, trying to improve your overall position. It has those real-time tactical elements in a fairly arcadey style. I know a lot of guys, or not a lot, but there's folks within the community who I think the combat is more realistic than it is. It is very arcadey, but it has a huge unit library of units that all have their own individual stats and traits and things like that are at least loosely based off of their real world performance. The battles are incredibly frenetic, with explosions and missiles flying all over. If you were to make a World War III arcade game, this would be it, with maybe a little bit more fidelity than that. Maybe I'm not being totally fair. Eugen's previous games were the Steel Division games, which sort of took their war game system and said, hey, what if we fought this in World War II? Which is interesting because that's where their company really, I think that's where they got their start. I think the Ruse game, which was, I think, published by Ubisoft and was on consoles. I've got a copy of it for my PS3 somewhere years ago. I think that was their first game. I could be wrong. But Ruse was sort of a World War II game that tried to do some interesting things about, like, hey, you detect radio signals here, and so you get intelligence. And it was sort of this model, but with imperfect information. And they went back to World War II with the Steel Division 1 game, which looked at the Normandy campaigns. It looked at Steel Division 2, looked at Operation Bagration in the Eastern Front. And Steel Division 2 added this Army General mode where you had units on the map, so you had like divisions or brigades or whatever that had their own order of battle. They would move around on a strategic map, and then when they would fight on a tactical map battle, the losses that they took there would carry over and influence the strategic map, and then if that unit fought again, the units it lost wouldn't be available to fight again. And so I thought the Army General mode was a great innovation in Steel Division. They had some dynamic campaign elements in the Wargames series, but it wasn't quite like that. And, so I really thought that was a great idea. Unfortunately, in Steel Division 2, because of the way that's managed, you got a lot of, silly battles. It's like, a police company up against a guards division or something like that, which I suppose happened in real life, where units that were thoroughly outclassed had to try and figure out how to hold their position. But it wasn't very fun to play at times. And at times it did feel very much like, either seal clubbing an enemy force or getting seal clubbed, or just a little bit of whack-a-mole where these small fragments or detachments would kind of grind the campaign to the ground. WARNO does have that same system, except for World War III in Germany. So that's fun, and you've got multiple different countries, on NATO's side and Warsaw Pact side to use, and you've got a wide variety of units, and it's fun to play. I don't think the campaign is terribly well balanced or designed to avoid the problems that Steel Division 2 had, in my opinion, but it's still a lot of fun. I still really enjoy it. It seems to be the most well-received Eugen game that I've seen in a while. It's got well more reviews than Steel Division 2 did on Steam, and more than double what Steel Division 1 did, Steel Division Normandy did. It's not, it's not yet to Wargame Red Dragon, which is their last Wargame game, but that game came out, a decade ago. So it seems to be pretty well received, I think. I mean, I don't know what the sales are, but at least based on review numbers, it definitely has a lot. So I don't know. I don't have a lot else to say with that. I think it still has a lot of the same limitations that the series has. So if you're a Eugen fan, you'll probably like it. If you're not a Eugen fan, you probably won't. When it first did come out, it was pretty rough, and it felt a little bit rushed. I don't know if they were trying to rush it out to get it ahead of some of the, the Microprose game. What is it? Broken Arrow Slytherin's game they're working on, which is in the same vein. And then there's Regiments, which was Microprose's game, which released, which again, very similar style of game. I don't know if they tried to rush it out to get ahead of some of those, but overall, I think it's a solid addition to the company's lineup, and I enjoy playing it, especially co-op with friends. But yeah, I'm not like a competitive online player. I don't really enjoy that. I think from a single player point of view, what I really enjoy is the grand campaign, because it's fun to just move units around a big map that's somewhat dynamic of Germany in a World War III environment. And for multiplayer, I really just enjoy doing co-op with friends. But it's a good time. I enjoy it. I'd like to play a little bit more of it. And that's all I've got really to say about that. At number 2 on my list is a game called Armored Brigade II by Velitica Studios. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. And published by Slytherin. This one, I don't know. I could see folks rolling their eyes at Warno. I could see folks rolling their eyes at this one. But again, it's based off of what I played and my perceptions. I think Armored Brigade 2 is a really good game. I think the reason that folks might be like, really? Is because it is pretty much Armored Brigade 1 in a lot of ways. Now, if you're not familiar with Armored Brigade 1, Armored Brigade generally is a real-time tactical war game. I would call it more in the simulation vein than Warno. Armored Brigade 1 didn't have any 3D, so it was like 2D, top-down. I think there were like little outlines of units when you zoomed in a little bit more. But generally, it was a World War III game with 2D graphics, and you had large, brigade-sized battles in Northern Europe where you would fight in the 1980s or 1960s, because the database goes from like the 60s to it's from 1965 to 1991. So you had a little bit wider of a variety of units than something like Warno. But you didn't have the eye candy. So like Warno, and a lot of this part of the video is going to be comparing the two, because Warno is like an eye candy, clickfest type game where it's a little bit more arcadey, but like it's there for the visuals. Armored Brigade is a more old school feeling war game with 3D, with less eye candy, but more focus on ballistics, more focus on sort of authenticity of combat, I think, than something like Warno. So, and it's a little bit slower pace. World War III is fast pace generally, right? Like the when you have missiles and you have modern tanks and aircraft and infantry with, tons of anti-tank guided missiles, it's a kill box. The whole damn map's a kill box in any of these kind of games. But Armored Brigade is a little bit more of a grognard war game, whereas Warno is not. Warno is the pick up and play crowd, and not really. The games aren't fast, but like they're fast paced in any event. Now, Armored Brigade II, its big addition over 1 was it added a 3D battlefield. I'd caveat that with it is a usable 3D battlefield. It is not adding a 3D battlefield in the sense of you're going to look at it and you're going to think, wow, everything's gorgeous. It's a little bit more than TAC view. So if you've played like Command Modern Operations with TAC view, or you've played like DCS and you've replayed your battles and viewed them in TAC view, that TAC view is like a very basic 3D image or outline of an aircraft. No real high fidelity art, just like almost like a polygon, like solid color, like outline of an F-16, right? Like if it was a plastic figurine or something without all the detailed graphics. And then you can watch, air battles occur, or in Command's place, you can watch ships or air battles or whatnot. So Armored Brigade has 3D, but it has 3D that's better than that, but not dramatically so. I saw someone comment on one of my videos for Armored Brigade, where like, combat mission looks better than this, and it does. It has at least unit detail looks better in combat mission. The point was to give the battlefield a 3D view, and I think it does the job well, but it doesn't make the game look gorgeous. What I really appreciate with the 3D, though, is the ability to see the terrain and the topography in 3D. You still got to use the line of sight tool to see where things are well, but I love the ability to see that battlefield, especially in sort of the valleys and hills and whatnot, the nature of Central Europe, in Germany, where you're fighting. Those elevations become really important. Line of sight becomes really important. And before, it felt like I'm looking at an atlas and trying to decipher line of sight. Today, you still need to use the line of sight tool, but the battlefield feels really more alive and more real when you've got those elevations, those curves, those nooks and crannies in the battlefield. It feels more like you're an operational commander overlooking a valley that your men have to move through. I also think some of the quality of life changes they made were improved. I feel like our helicopters became so much better and more useful in the updates that they have. And so, like, if you have Armored Brigade 1, I don't know. Like, it depends how much you play it, if it's worth getting it. If you don't have Armored Brigade 1, definitely get 2. 2 is basically the same game as 1, just with, like I said, some quality of life improvements and better visuals. I hope to see a large modding community spot up around this. It's not on Steam yet. It is only available through Matrix and Slytherin's website directly, but it will be coming to Steam next year. It's on the list because it did release last year, but it just didn't release on Steam. So I've enjoyed the time I put into it. I want to put more into it. It has 2 different types of campaigns. One where it's like a dynamic campaign where you kind of build a unit with points and then carry those forces through a series of linked battles that, the outcome influences what's next. And then it also has a stock sort of scripted campaign where you get mission information and briefings based on sort of a story that's designed around that campaign, and to move forward you do have to win the battle. I actually prefer that campaign. I think it has more soul to it than the dynamic campaign, but I don't know, I really enjoy Armored Brigade generally. I think it's like made by 1 or 2 guys. It's a really small studio. I think it's a very different type of game. I wouldn't say buy this versus Warno or buy Warno versus this. I think it depends on the type of player and what you're looking for. But generally, I really enjoy Armored Brigade II. And so that's why it's number 2 on my list. Now, I will say, and this may come off, especially at this point, as damning this list with faint praise. I felt like 2024 was a little bit of a soft year in terms of war games. That's not a shot at Armored Brigade. It's not a shot at Warno or Classified or anything like that. But it did feel like there weren't a lot of war games that came out this year, at least not ones that I played a lot of. You know, there were games that I enjoyed. I played Strategic Command, World War II, War in the Pacific. But I wouldn't put that, like, because Strategic Command games are frankly bad at naval combat, I can't put this on a list like this, right? Like, I spent time in it. I enjoyed it. I'm not going to include it in a top 5 list because I think the naval element is the weakest part of the game. And for a Pacific War game, that's the core of what you're looking at. And so, like, there were other games that could have been on this list, but not a lot. It felt like a really kind of soft year for war games. I think there were some really good ones, and I'm talking about some of them, but I don't know that there were a ton of them, so that, you know, the competition for this list was not as robust as I would like. Hopefully next year we'll see a few more of these come out, but that's just sort of a general my sentiment on the year of 2024. I don't have an honorable list I want to bring up. Usually this would be the part of the video where I'd say, and my honorable mention is, but I don't have an honorable mention for this year. I don't think any of these games or war games in general were bad this year, but I also don't think it was a super strong year like we've had in the past. So it's interesting I feel that way too, by the way, before we jump into the number 1 game of the year. It's interesting I feel that way about this year because I don't feel that way about strategy games generally. I think it was a very strong year for strategy games, but for the war games specific list, it did feel like some of those grognard games, some of those games that scratch the itch of the folks, not a city builder, right? Like, I think it was a game that the strategy genre did not shine as brightly on war games as perhaps it did on survival games or narrative strategy games or especially city builders. And for what it's worth, also, Field of Glory Kingdoms, I did not put on this list. I consider that more of a strategy game, so we'll see if that makes it on the strategy list. But that definitely has war game elements. But because the core battle and engine for that is really Field of Glory 2, we didn't put it on this list because I think it belongs more as a grand strategy map painter than it does a war game. All right, and that brings us to the number 1 war game of 2024, and that game is Sea Power, Naval Combat in the Missile Age, developed by Jurassic Games, published by Microprose, and this game is effectively a spiritual successor to the Jane's Fleet Command games. It has elements of Dangerous Waters. This is a modern, real-time naval simulation war game that takes place in the 1960s to the 1980s. Primarily, I would say at this point in the game, it focuses on ship-to-ship combat. It does have air elements. It does have the ability to attack ground targets with air units. It's got freaking B-52s. It's got some, Vietnam scenarios where you bombard the coast. So it's not limited to ship versus ship or submarine versus ship, but it is, I would say, that is definitely where the game excels at this point. And I say at this point because the game is in early access. I debated putting this game on the list because I thought, is this a game of 2024? It came out in November of 2024. Is this a game that deserves to be on the list in 2024, or should we hold off and put it on the list in 2025? And frankly, kind of going back to what I said before, I didn't know what I would put as number 1 if I didn't put Sea Power. It is a gorgeous game. It is a surprisingly deep game for as easy as it is to pick up and play and sort of intuitively learn things. It does have some implied knowledge, right? Like, if you don't know much about naval combat, you might think you should bang away with your radar at all times. Not a good idea when that gives away your position, but, it's definitely a game that has a good amount of depth. I would say the AI needs work. It is an early access game in that sense. I also, the campaign is slated to come out next year. So that's another reason I thought about maybe holding it off and putting it on the list next year if that played out. But I felt there was enough here to put this on the list for this year. The scenarios are well done. Jane's never had a dynamic campaign. I think the scenarios are generally good. I've seen a ton of folks diving in and creating their own scenarios through the scenario editor, which is very nice and simple to use. Finish, who's been on our single malt strategy podcast multiple times, has made some really interesting scenarios. The community seems to really be lining up behind it. There's so many good things to say about this game, and there are bad things as well. Like I said, the AI is not terribly great, and the scenario design for the included scenarios I wish was a little bit more in depth. This game has the ability to fire events. This game has the ability to have better briefings and information to really bring the world alive. And there's a fair degree of variability in the scenarios between ones where it's like, yeah, this looks like someone put a lot of time and effort into making me feel like I'm there, as opposed to just, oh, I'm on a strategic, or I'm on a map now. What am I going to do? I do think there's elements I'd like to see of the game do more, where it does a better job of communicating information to you, or where it makes it easier to find information that you don't just miss. I think there are times where you issue an order and it doesn't happen in the game. There might be a very fine print somewhere of why it didn't happen, but have someone tell me, oh, can't do that, sir. The catapult's busy. We can't launch another aircraft. Can't fire another air-to-air missile, sir. We've got all of our illuminators are used up on the ships, right? Because this is a game that models radar systems. It models how many missiles your ship can track outgoing, how many targets you can track outgoing. It is a game that includes layers within the ocean. So temperature gradient and pressure differences in the ocean influence sensor detection of submarines. It's got AWACS aircraft that you use to light up the air so you can find out where the bad guys are without having to turn the radars on your carrier and give away your carrier's position. It's a game that's got a pretty solid, unit reference database, a little bit like, what you find in Command, not quite to that level of depth, but the game isn't really to the level of depth of a Command modern operations game. It kind of follows sort of the halfway point, I would say, between full-on grog game and something that is more approachable. I think the user interface is pretty well done. I don't know how much more I want to talk about this, just because we've done a podcast about this. It's included for some folks on our single malt strategy top games of the year list. There's a lot. I've talked about this game a lot. We've played this game on the channel. They're continually updating it. They just added a guided, I think, a nuclear powered cruiser, I want to say. So they've added some more ships. I'd like to see vertical launch systems included. They're not right now. The game kind of ends right as they're starting to come online. Well, that's not true. Some of the Russian ships have it, but most of the American ships, you're not yet to the Arleigh Burke era. That comes later. You don't really see the Tycho upgrades to the VLSs yet. I think the game is 65 to 83-ish in terms of the unit database. But yeah, overall, really impressed by what I see from Sea Power so far. I think it still has a ways more to go to get to what it can become. And I think that dynamic campaign is going to be clutch, but I think where the game really could use some help is coming alive more by making the world feel like it's more than just some units on a map that I'm trying to piece together. I love the 2D map where you can fight it like a command game, where it's just hey, there's a 2D user interface I'm playing across. But then also the ability to jump into the 3D imagery. It is gorgeous. It's a great game so far. It's definitely my favorite game of 2024. It might be my favorite game of 2025, but we'll see. Obviously, the year hasn't started yet, so let me know, guys. That's my list. I think this it was an interesting year for strategy games broadly. We started to see some stuff come out from Microprose that we had been waiting on for a long time. Sea Power being one of their tentpole games when they announced they were coming back. Field of Glory 2 came out, which had been, or not Field of Glory 2, Field of Glory Kingdoms came out, which had been in development for a long time we had known about. WARNO kind of went from being a really ramshackle early access release in 2023, I think it was, to a much better put together and enjoyable game in 2024. Overall, I think it was a solid year, although not as deep as one as I would like. I think we might see a really solid year in 2025. There's a number of games that I'm very excited about that are slated to come out, but that will be a topic for another video. I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments down below. And without further ado, that's going to do it for today's video. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying thank you for watching, and I'm out.